villains from present and the past. Every week will be an animated bash. What a cartoon! What a cartoon! Maybe a short but mostly shows. We'll talk, we'll analyze, exploring as we go. What a cartoon! What a cartoon! What a cartoon! What a cartoon!
Hello, everybody, and welcome to What a Cartoon, where Cheers is never canceled. I'm your host, Pez fan Bob Mackey, and this is an audio exploration of every cartoon ever. Who is here with me today?
Henry Gilbert, and why does nobody else notice that guy is 1.5 feet tall?
And who else is here?
This is Jeremy Brer Lappin Parrish.
I see in today's episodes are the Maxx episodes 2 and 12. So yes, we're doing the classic MTV miniseries, The Maxx, and yes, it is a classic now. It is 23 years old.
It's vintage. Oh, it's almost vintage.
It's older than all of us. No, wait. We're very old, so never mind.
I can't speak for you guys.
It's very, very old. But up front, I want to say the content warning for this episode. Upon revisiting this as an adult, I was like, oh, a lot of the Maxx is about sexual assault, and that was a very abstract idea when I was 12 and watching this. And now it is something that is a much realer and less abstract idea in my head, and you might not want to hear about this from a fun cartoon podcast, and we will try to address it gently and sensibly, but it is a very much part of this show. So I just want to say that up front.
Yeah.
If you don't like that idea, then please, wait for next week's episode.
Absolutely understandable if you don't want to hear that stuff.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So in case you haven't heard of The Maxx, this miniseries adapts the first 11 comics of the Image Comics series, The Maxx, and it was fairly popular for the one season it ran, and it sort of has an ending, but after reading beyond where this series ends and the comic, continues, it could have easily had a second season. But before I continue talking about what this is, where did you guys find The Maxx? What is your history with The Maxx?
Well, for me, it came out at the height of my comic super fandom as a 10-year-old or 11-year-old. Plus, longtime listeners may know that my childhood nickname was Maxx. Mm-hmm. So here is the coolest thing in the world, an Image comic with my name on it. And I really loved the design of the guy. And also, I was a fan of Sam Keith's from his Wolverine comics that he had been drawing just a year or two earlier. So I picked it up and read it. I bought issues 1 and 2. But after that, I was like, this confuses me and makes me feel uncomfortable. This is not straightforward Wolverine cutting people. Then a couple of years later when the adaptation came out, I think I matured just enough to enjoy that, though it still made me uncomfortable. So then now revisiting it, I really appreciate it in a much deeper level than when I was 12.
How about you, Jeremy?
Well, as a senior citizen, I was already in junior high, maybe high school, when the Image comic series launched. I was in high school for sure.
Yeah, it was spring of 93.
Yeah, 93. So I was almost out of high school. Wow, that's how old I am. And I had gotten really big into superhero comics, Marvel comics especially, around the time that they relaunched X-Men or did, the X-Men Gold or whatever you want to call it. And so I was very tuned into Image Comics when it launched and picked up all the issue 1s. And then there were no issue 2s for about 6 months. And then the next wave of comics hit, and the Maxx was part of it. So I picked up that second wave of issue 1s also. And I stopped collecting pretty much all the Image series around issue 3 of each because they were bad. And the only ones I continued buying were Spawn, which I kept reading until like mid-teens, maybe early 20s. And the Maxx, which I basically followed all the way through because the Maxx was completely different from everything else Image was doing and seemed a lot more interesting. It wasn't just like badly done superhero comics. It looked like a superhero comic, but then you read it and you realized that it was not a superhero comic at all. It was almost like a deconstruction of superhero comics. And I didn't know the word deconstruction at the time, but I definitely found appeal in this comic that took the superhero concept and then said no. Mm-hmm. And, I think the one that really struck me was maybe issue 5 or 6 when Maxx is being attacked by one of the minor villains from the Savage Dragon, and he's like complaining, well, I can't even get a real villain. I just have someone else's villain's lackey. But the entire thing, like there's running commentary from the villain talking about how gripping and hot it is that, the hero's being pushed to the edge, and isn't this violence so great? And, once the bad guy gets him on the rope, then it totally justifies whatever the hero does to him. And that really made me sit back and say, I need to think more critically about these comic books that I'm reading. So it was kind of an awakening for me in a lot of ways.
I like those weird excursions in the comic. I like how they changed them for the TV series to make them fit more with the content and the format, and the fact
and
that
also not having someone else's licensed
that's
character.
right. We'll get into Pitt is also in the Maxx, by the way. The famous
comic.
Great character Pitt.
Yes, the one that they based the Incredible Hulk on.
Yeah, Dale Nguyen and Sam Keith were Hulk brothers. They'd both drawn on the Hulk.
Okay,
so
that makes sense.
They're
both drawing different kinds of Hulks.
Well, yeah, the interesting thing in the start of Image was that they were all just artists. They weren't businessmen. They were artists who would, over the period of 2 years, just become businessmen.
Right. They also weren't writers.
No, they weren't. No, but when they started as artists together, like, I'll draw you and you draw mine, and we'll just share all these characters. Which then 3 years later, when they're all like, "This is my intellectual property, and I'm sorry I ever gave you the rights for Chapel to appear in Spawn," or
the fight over Angela. We all lived through it. My experience with this is, I believe I got into comics in '94. I had a friend around that time who was way into comics, sort of like. He was the Henry Gilbert of my middle school, almost. Let's call him that.
The coolest guy.
The coolest kid ever. And I was sort of like snobbish about superhero stuff. And by the way, I'm not a snob anymore. All I watch are cartoons and anime anymore. So
You don't watch much superhero stuff, though.
no, I still don't. I still have a mental block. But the Maxx, as Jeremy and Henry are pointing out, is not traditional superhero stuff. And I assume that I saw it in comic stores in the year I was looking at comics. But when the series came on MTV, I was like, I was so fixated on this, and I was like, I have to read all of the comics. And I believe I talked on an earlier episode of What a Cartoon that Image Comics were more appealing to me, because by the time I found Image Comics, they were all like at issue 6 or 8, and it's like, well, I have the money to buy all of the issues of this series, and they are usually in this comic book store, or they will be. So it was much more attainable than, say, getting like a Spider-Man 300 or something like that, and trying to figure out where that fell in the timeline and who these people are. Like, having that kind of a fresh start for comics was what drew me to those comics, and that's why I really got into the Maxx. But I remember loving this MTV series, taping it and rewatching it over and over and over again. In fact, one of the episodes on this podcast we're doing, so on Talking Simpsons, we talk about Henry Gilbert's VHS tapes. Now it's time to talk about my VHS tapes. That tape had a lot of great stuff on it that I still remember. I still remember the contents of that VHS tape. I believe it had the launch of Kids WB, the entire first...
Just that first morning?
That first morning, but it also had
Wow.
like Who Shot Mr. Burns, the last 3 episodes of the Maxx, and just... I remember rewatching this over and over and over, and watching this over again, and I rewatched the entire series over again for this podcast. I have everything memorized. I have like line readings memorized. And Jeremy was the one who brought this to us. We weren't even thinking about doing the Maxx, but just rewatching it and then rereading all the comics. Not all the comics, up to like 16 or 17. I'm like, oh my God, this is like in my brain somewhere, and I'm just pulling it out again. So.
Yeah, the dialogue in the comics was almost taken verbatim into the cartoon. There were some edits made, stuff kind of streamlined for time, but it was all written by William Messner Loebs, who I think Sam Keith had the very smart idea to say, I know my limits as a writer. I have some great ideas. I can draw really cool, weird stuff, but I need someone to come in and actually do the script for me. And as a result, the Maxx was definitely the best written of the Image comics and had some amazing dialogue. And like you said, I remember some of this, not even from the cartoon, but from the original comic. Things like Julie saying, I'll take that under advisement, seeing as I have a job and you have a blanket with vomit on it. Just like lines like that, so punchy, kind of mean-spirited sometimes, but...
And they're not too... They're rarely too clever by half. There's a few like cringe-worthy lines, but I feel like he does a really good job throughout.
Yeah, I feel like it's not natural dialogue, but it's also not Joss Whedon dialogue.
That's true.
So
Yeah.
it toes a happy line in between. It's good.
Rewatching this now, I'm more impressed with it than when I saw it as a kid. When I saw it as a kid, it just fit into the same trippy MTV shows that all came out of Liquid TV.
Yeah,
but going back to it, it feels so much better than the than the flash of some of the other Liquid Television shows. And the postmodernism of it, especially, I really do love that it's deconstructing itself as it goes. There's so many. I rewatched the whole thing too, and there's just so many lines where somebody says, "Oh, is this supposed to represent that?" And this is the moment where I have this big revelation. I was like, "Oh, wow, you know that would be hacky to do that now, and you're saying it out loud." That really impressed me in reviewing it.
Yeah, I almost kind of wish we had done the episode where Sarah has the gun, the character Sarah, who starts out as like a minor character and eventually becomes the main character of the series. Because at the end of that's one of those you're talking about where it kind of deconstructs itself. And it does end on, someone trying to reassure her with a cliche, but being aware about it and saying like, I realize that sounds terrible, but you just have to keep holding out for the best in life. Mm-hmm. So there was some sincerity behind the series, even as it kind of dismantled superhero comics and dismantled teen culture and feminism and a lot of things.
I identify with Sarah now because it sucks to live in a time when things are too obvious. Like, this is it. This is the thing we're living in. Okay, whatever. It's too obvious, and I hate it. But before we get into the cartoon, I want to talk about Sam Keith and the comic. Sam Keith, born 1963. I have a brief bio on him and just where he came from. So one of his first major roles was an artist for comics like Mage and Fish Police. So he was an inker on both of those. And in fact, I think I blew our friend Shane Bettenhausen's mind by explaining that Fish Police was a comic. It was a slightly edgy alternative comic that was turned into a Hanna-Barbera, barely remembered Simpsons wannabe in like the early 90s.
Yeah, Comico was a real hole of they had all these great brands for like 2 years and then it was just gone. And it was, for a long time, almost impossible to find reprints of the Comico issues of some of these series if you were starting to get into them, like Mage or Grendel, books like that. And Sam Keith's early work was among those too.
Mm-hmm. So from there, one of his major roles as an artist, as a penciler, was the first 5-issue story arc for Neil Gaiman's The Sandman, which looks very different from the rest of that series. But it's still very beautiful.
Well, we should talk a little bit about Sam Keith's art style, which is very distinct. And that's one of the things that drew me to the Maxx, because everyone else who was drawing for Image at that point was very much in the Jim Lee, Rob Liefeld style, where it was like, everyone is bulky and muscular, or the women are like wasp-waisted and have huge boobs, and everyone wears skin-tight clothes, lots of pouches, lots of guns. Sam Keith does not draw like that. Like sometimes... the Maxx does look like he has like a superhero anatomy.
There's definitely some Frank Frazetta in there.
Oh, yeah.
But like an off-model Frank Frazetta.
Yeah, well, that's the thing, is everything for Sam Keith is off-model. His art style, it reminds me almost of, what you see in manga, like by people like Osamu Tezuka, where he's not afraid to draw someone extremely realistically in one panel, and then the next panel... They almost look like, some sort of rubber stretch toy. And sometimes, on the same page, he'll combine the two and draw someone in a very cartoonish style, but with hyper detailed, like shadowing and chiaroscuro and just like lots and lots of interesting effects. He also was I think the only Image artist, the company was a pioneer in digital artwork for comics, digital coloring especially. But he also worked in a lot of traditional media, especially on the covers. You'll see like collage, and you'll see like, clearly painterly effects where you have like scumbling and intaglio and things like that. One of my favorite covers is, like, if you look at Max's foot, it's clearly built with like a washer and string and stuff that then he's painted over. And so it really gave you this very different effect. And he uses really heavy line work. He's not afraid to draw people who aren't super conventionally attractive. I mean, there's a lot of talk about how, with his female characters, they do pinups. And again, you said there's Frazetta influence. And when you see Julie as the Jungle Queen, that definitely comes through.
Oh, yeah.
And you have these almost like painterly panels. But he also draws Julie with like a potbelly and, like... she's flawed, and everyone is somewhat flawed in different ways. And the Maxx himself, like I said, sometimes he's very upright and muscular, but most of the times he's hunched over and just like this not even muscular, just like this blob of purple guy with big teeth and a yellow stripe.
I like when he has big cartoony eyes.
And something I loved about Sam Keith's art style is how scraggly he draws people too. There's just a lot of frayed fabric to them, and that was a big thing he had on Wolverine too, and his superhero stuff, like Wolverine, especially because Wolverine's healing factor, he would get his clothes cut up and then his skin would heal, but not his clothes. So he'd just have like these tatters and rags on him. It was a real. It sets the stage for the rag man that Maxx is.
Yeah, I mean, Max's debut is actually not the Maxx #1, it's Darker Image #1, which was going to be a monthly anthology with, I think, Jim Lee and Will Spataccio or someone else doing, like, contributing, 10-page stories, and no one else could hit their deadlines except Sam Keith, so the Maxx became its own monthly comic. But at the very end of that, like, the Darker Image story seems very much like build up to a superhero story, and the final panel is very much like Sam Keith drawing in the Wolverine mode, where Maxx is like hulking huge. It's just like a full page drawing, and it's almost like Excelsior paper just flying off of him in every direction. His costume is torn to shreds and tatters. He loves drawing Julie with like gigantic bell bottoms that just flow unrealistically.
And the cartoon adapts all of that so well.
It does.
In many cases by using the original art. In fact, I'm reading the newer re-releases of the Maxx. It's called the Maxx Maximized. And in those editions, the art is rescanned at a higher resolution and recolored, and it's so beautiful. And on my tablet, I'm just like zooming in on panels and just like looking at how intricate all of the line work is in so many of the panels. And you can now, like, because you're talking about some covers are paintings, some pages are paintings in the Maxx, and you can just zoom in and see all the brush strokes and all the effects and things like that.
Yeah, you didn't really see that a lot in superhero comics. Bill Sienkiewicz, I know, did a lot of that in New Mutants. And so you would get these like crazy New Mutants stories, but that was such an outlier in superhero comics.
The only other person contemporary at the time I can think of is actually related to Sandman too. Dave McKeon, the cover artist for Sandman, worked very much in those mixed media things, but he also didn't do much interior art, just like Bill Sienkiewicz. It's just like it takes so long they can only do monthly covers.
Right.
But going back to the Sandman thing, also I definitely now see as an adult, I feel that Sam Keith had an axe to grind with Neil Gaiman, because he was assigned Sandman and he did 5 issues of it. And when they started Sandman, they thought it was going to be the next Swamp Thing, that was Alan Moore's Swamp Thing, a horror book that's smart. And Sam Keith is perfect for that. But 5 issues in, they realized, like, well, no, this is more a goth exploration of ennui, not so much horror. So Sam Keith wasn't a good fit for it. And then this book really took off after he left. And I think he has some issues with that, as seen in the Sarah episode.
He
I
can't
don't
draw
know.
those Robert Smith style characters as well
Well,
as other people.
I don't know. Sarah is definitely a goth girl with ennui. And yeah, she does like literally throw a tomato at a drawing of death from Sandman.
Yes.
But I didn't get the impression that it was necessarily Sam Keith grinding an axe, because she is meant to be disaffected. You're not necessarily supposed to agree with her perceptions. Like, you can sympathize with Sarah, but at the same time, she's still got that like teenager with a chip on her shoulder attitude. So he's really good in this series of kind of creating these multi-layered characters, and even though you can find something to like in all of them, at the same time, everyone has something about themselves that repulses you. And with Sarah, it's just kind of her attitude. With Mr. Gone, it's the fact that he is like a serial murderer and sexual assaulter.
I think I agree with Sarah in this case, because Death was the original Harley Quinn of that era. It's like the cute comic girl every guy had a boner for, basically. And they shouldn't. We shouldn't like clowns, everybody, or death. So we left off with Sandman 1989. In 1989 to 91, this is where he started working with Bill Messner-Loebs, who ended up writing the Maxx with him and doing the dialogue for the Maxx. Apparently, Bill Messner-Loebs had a series called Epicurus the Sage. I've never read it. I don't know what it's about,
Actually,
but there
I've never read it
are
either.
2 issues of it.
Wow.
And that is, it's all Sam Keith art and Messner-Loebs dialogue and story and everything. So I'm sure it's pretty good.
I know him from Messner-Loebs from his run on Wonder Woman. At the time that Superman died and Batman had his back broken, Loebs wrote the Wonder Woman arc where Wonder Woman stops being Wonder Woman. She gets replaced by Artemis, and she has to get a real job. And there's some real cool...
Get a job, Wonder Woman.
There's some real cool Brian Boland covers to that run, where like one where it's Wonder Woman working at a McDonald's. It's good
Whoa.
art, but yeah.
Does she lasso some fries?
No, she has a tray like, here's your order, and she's wearing a hat with it.
Okay, boy, when McDonald's had table service, is this what's happening? So in 1990, he started working for Marvel. He did pencils for The Incredible Hulk, 368, and that led to him being a cover artist for Marvel and not necessarily a penciler. And in 93, he left Marvel for Image, and the Maxx #1 would be released in March of 93. And since the Maxx ended 20 years ago, so it ended in 1998, he's had a lot of regular work. It's been 20 years. He's had lots of regular work on Batman stuff and his own original series, which the good part about his own original series is now they don't really last more than 5 issues, because I think he learned from the Maxx, like, I get bored and distracted, and we'll talk more about how he gets bored and distracted.
Yeah,
but
the series is 5-issue arcs, so that makes sense.
he likes to just be like, well, I'm done with that character, but the fans are like, no, but, we want to know what happens to them. So,
Well, I think also after the Maxx, his creator-owned stuff, I think he realized, like, why am I in the Maxx? He has a giant weird dude, but he's really interested in writing stories about sad women. So the later ones were just like Zero Girl was one of his books. They're just, the woman is front and center. It's about he just makes them the main character outright. His Marvel work was where I first saw Sam Keith, and his run on Marvel Comics Presents with Wolverine were really good. Like he drew Wolverine so weird and just like the most like hunched over. The Maxx is Wolverine plus like 5% crazier and homeless. Like they're the same guy.
more teeth.
They even have the claw, like, and they have the same stupid mask, pretty much. Like, and also he's a wild man, and weirdest or the most coincident of all that it feels like this stemmed from his Wolverine work was he really liked doing stories about Wolverine teamed up with a young girl named Jubilee.
Yeah, I was going to say, is Julia basic, or Sarah maybe his Jubilee?
I think they're kind of both her, but also like name-wise, Jubilee to Julie is not a big jump.
Well, I mean, pretty much all of the early Image stuff was Marvel character that this person had worked on with the details just shuffled around a little bit, like the
Five
Pit.
lots of cereal.
He's pretty much the Hulk.
What if the Hulk had more accessories and nails?
Yeah, Youngblood, that's pretty much X-Force plus the Thing.
On Twitter, I think I called Venom Wet Spawn. He's just a wet
That
spawn.
sounds obscene.
Yes, it is.
And the first time I actually read a Sam Keith book, I think was Marvel with Charleston Chew.
Charleston Chew.
It had
Were those
giveaway.
ads?
They had ads for them, but if you bought 5 Charleston Chews or whatever, you could send away for a free comic book. And so it was a flip comic of 11 pages. One was a fairly standard Spider-Man comic where he fights the eel. And then on the flip side is a weird-ass Sam Keith Wolverine story where he's fighting a robot in the danger room with Jubilee.
You can read it while you're waiting for the dentist to replace your fillings after eating that Charleston Chew. Well, what a vile candy. So let's talk about the comic. We talked about it a bit. So as Jeremy mentioned, I believe, this is part of the second wave of Image Comics. I believe the first wave was 92?
Something like that.
92, I think. And Berkeley, California, right? In this
That's where
very
the publishing
city.
Yeah, that's where
Well,
the
it was
publishing
published by
arm is
Malibu
based.
initially, and
I
Malibu
see.
is based out here, but all the creators were pretty much New York because they were Marvel.
Or just peppered throughout America doing it like Rob Liefeld and his Extreme Studios, they moved to LA pretty quick.
They didn't move to San Francisco so he could invent X-Force and be on Levi's commercials because Levi's is here in the Bay Area.
He had to get yelled at by Stan Lee first before he left.
Jim Lee's Wildstorm was definitely based here too in SF. But that was the first run of guys, and that proved how popular Image could be, that they only needed Malibu for like a year or so. And then every artist was like Sam Keith could never have launched Image, but he was big enough to follow the guys to Image.
And by the time Sam Keith and that second wave of comics, I think like Silverhawk and a couple of others, by the time those appeared, Image had figured out its business because it was a bunch of artists who didn't know what they were doing, and none of them hit their schedules. Like the issue 1s came out, like I said, and it took months for anyone to come out with issue 2. There was no continuity between some of the issue 1s and issue 2s. Like Youngblood ends on a teaser for issue 2, and then issue 2 is a completely different story. And so they had to bring in someone who was basically like, I'm the guy who is the traffic cop, and I'm going to hit you until you get your stuff together. So Sam Keith benefited from that first wave of like, how do we business? And so his work was much more consistent.
So they eventually hired a managing editor then for
Basically,
for all the artists and writers.
like a higher level manager,
Yeah.
like someone who could be a managing editor to the founders of the company and smack them on the knuckles with a ruler.
The Rob Liefeld still never listened to those people. He's too busy driving around Lamborghinis.
Too busy drawing some weird Captain Americas.
Oh boy, that is weird. So the cartoon covers in 13 episodes the first 11 issues of the Maxx. And I think that's the best material, and it sort of leaves off at a good point, although I feel like they could have made a season 2 with the way it ends. It's like the comic is 95% the same thing as the cartoon, down to the dialogue. There are very few tiny changes, like a few bits of censorship, but it's so slavish to the source material.
It is even more slavish than Watchmen, but in a good way, unlike Watchmen. And this, the comic series was still a going concern in 1995 when this TV show ran. So they had to do the Akira Nausicaa thing where they were like, well, we run out of material and the comic's still going and we don't know how the creator's going to end it. So let's just come up with a new ending. And in this case, as with like Akira and Nausicaa, the creator was involved in the cartoon, so he's the one who came up with this ending. But it definitely is different than the direction the comic went.
And to be fair, that ending is like 15 seconds of new content, and I think they could have recovered from it. I would have loved to see another season of this show. But the first 11 issues, and you'll see this if you watch the series, they're very uneven in terms of storytelling. I mean, it's all very good, but he is all over the place, where the first 3 issues could have just been a miniseries on their own because the villain is killed. And then issue 4 is like, who's this Sarah girl? Oh, this is called the Maxx, but Maxx is only on the first and last pages. And he doesn't even need to be the Maxx in this book. And that's like one of my favorite issues. It's just a short story about a teenage girl. And he does that a lot. It's like, oh, you want to hear more of Julie Winter's story and what happens to Mr. Gone? Well, no, we're going to have the creator, the future creator of Cow and Chicken, create a character for the Maxx to play around with for an issue.
It's going to be one whole Dr. Seuss riff.
Exactly.
In a completely different art style.
That guy is just Mr. No Pants from Cow and Chicken.
Yeah, it's David Feast who did
Holy
the
fuck.
art for that whole thing. But
Crap on in a hat.
crap on in a hat, and it's like, you want to know more about what's going to happen next? Well, what if the Maxx fought, Savage Dragon subvillain, and you want to know what happens next? What if the Maxx teamed up with Pitt? We all love Pitt, and it's just sort of all over the place. And I can see how this could be frustrating as a reader at the time. But after the TV series ends, those comics all start answering questions because I feel like there were many more eyes on the comics. So he has to start explaining like what the mask is, how all the characters are related, what happened to Mr. Gone, because the first 11 issues, like, they're so inconsistent and often contradict themselves in many ways. And I feel like the TV show was good for Sam Keith because he had more pressure to actually deliver on the questions that he never wanted to answer.
Yeah, there are a lot of contradictions in the storytelling. Like the mugger who is in the opening scenes of the first issue is just like a dude who's mugging, but then they find his corpse a long time later, like 5 issues later, and it turns out he's actually one of those creatures, which, like, that doesn't work in with the rule set that was kind of clearly established within the comics. But I don't think consistency was necessarily as important as themes or ideas for Keith.
But after issue 12, each comic connects directly with the last comic. It just keeps telling like a linear story until issue 20, where that is where there's a Naruto-style time skip, and it goes to the future year of 2005, and then Sarah is the main character. But I'll tell you, that part of the series is not very good, and Sam Keith was getting very distracted to the point where during that series, he made a 3-issue miniseries called Friends of the Maxx, in which Sam Keith was like, what if I just told stories about people, and the Maxx would just introduce them, and I don't want to go back to my normal comics. So I read those, and they were just like Sam Keith writing alternative comics, similar to the Sarah issue of the Maxx, where it's just like, here's a story about a person. There's no magic stuff. There's no superheroes. They're just, people. And he had the power to do that, but he clearly was distracted, and that part of the saga has no really good end, and it's kind of disappointing.
Well, I feel bad for him that he had huge success with the Maxx, but he clearly wasn't that into the character of the Maxx after a certain point, like if he ever was.
Well, I think it gets back to some of, the tracing his history and talking about the similarities between Maxx and Wolverine. Clearly, he was someone who wanted to get into comics, and in the 80s and 90s, the only way to get into comics and make money on doing it was to work with, Marvel or DC or Valiant, I don't know. And what did they create? They created superheroes. Their portfolios had really kind of shrunk down from doing also romance and horror and vampires and westerns and barbarians to just superheroes. So he had to do superheroes, and that's what he carried forward into Image because that's what Image did. And being a creator-owned comic afforded him the freedom to kind of get away from that, but he was still sort of beholden to that superhero inflection point. So I feel like Maxx himself almost became sort of a relic of, he was kind of almost like grandfathered into the series. He kind of had to be there because that's the only way that Keith could have gotten his own major comic series, was to have a superhero kind of guy, but that's really not what he wanted to do. And eventually he had the freedom to get away from that.
You need that guy on the cover to sell it the first time. If Julie was on the cover, the children, me included, would not have bought it when I was 10.
Girls?
Yeah.
I don't want a girl.
This is a girl comic.
Like,
no, thank you.
Issue 4, the Sarah issue, which is covered in the TV series. Maxx is on the cover. It's just the Maxx. There's no picture of Sarah or something like that.
That's like his most superheroic pose.
Yeah.
Period.
It does not fit the contents at all.
Yeah, it's like you see him from behind and he's all standing upright and everyone's kind of cowering from him. That never happens in the comics.
It was a real bait and switch.
Yeah, wow, that's a real.
Yeah, look at that.
Yeah, it's crazy. But
We're
yep.
looking at it now.
That's a
yeah.
story about a mopey girl and a
Not a
possible
superhero's
suicide. Yeah. So again, you can buy this series digitally or in hardcovers. The Maxx Maximized editions are very cheap digitally, and they're great to read. And you can just go through them really quick, and you can zoom in on all that great art. It's such the ideal way to read these comics again. And again, I think I would stop at 20 and keep going if you're interested in seeing what happens. But just know that you're in for a disappointment. It gets weird and bad.
And I was shocked to see where the Maxx is now. I did not expect
That's right.
Yeah.
We didn't plan this, but this month, the first issue of the Maxx Batman came out, where the Maxx and Batman team up to do stuff in the Outback. I haven't read that yet. I want to. I think I might wait till it's collected.
Yeah,
in the full volume.
I didn't even know about that. That was not what prompted me to suggest this topic.
I only found out about it when researching for this
same
episode,
same here.
like last week.
Last night for me.
And apparently it starts with the Maxx in Arkham, which that's a good place to start with.
Yeah, that Maxx
He belongs
fits in
there.
there.
Well, and Sam
He's
Keith,
purple and crazy. That I can think of someone else like that.
well, and Sam Keith draws a good Batman too, but a weird ass Batman with like a giant head and
ears.
the hugest ears.
Disgusting stubble.
Yes, yeah. Which you would think Bruce Wayne would shave often. I think, though, we just saw Bruce Wayne's penis too recently. in
Oh,
comic
man.
books.
Speak for yourself. I did not see that.
Well, honestly, there's you barely get to see anything. Like DC should have gone whole hog if they're going to draw it.
Whole hog. He's no Dr.
Boy.
Manhattan, is what you're saying.
No.
I know somebody that works in a comic store, and she was very sick about hearing about Batman's dick after day one.
Well, it's like you can only see the head anyway. Anyway, not to talk about his penis all the time.
Sam Keith didn't draw that, but you can read the Batman Maxx comic. It's out as of this recording, and there'll be 5 of them. And is this the first real return of the Maxx in an official form?
I think so. I think this was the ramp up back to it because those Maximized editions were the reprints overseen by him through IDW, which was also interesting that he didn't want to publish it through Image. It's his book. That's the other cool thing about Image. Like, if you want to publish it somewhere that's not Image, they let you do it.
And
They
those
don't own it.
reprints are recent. They're within the past 3 or 4 years.
Yeah, but I think
too.
they're already out of print because I was looking at them on Amazon, and wow, they've gotten expensive.
The digital ones are great.
Yeah, I need to pick those up.
And also I think this crossover follows. If he's doing it with IDW, it follows. IDW has been doing a few crossovers with DC. Like, they're friendly. Like, that's where there's the fun but stupid TMNT meets Batman ones, where they're kind of supposed to be the Eastman and Laird TMNT meeting Batman. And I've not read it, but I have seen the
the panel.
the funny out of context panel of "This is the alley where my mother and father died," Raphael. That's
That is not radical. Let's talk about the cartoon series. So we have to talk about who made it. That's Rough Draft Studios. They're now superstars.
Oh, I didn't realize this was Rough Draft.
It's Rough
Okay.
Draft. It's their first wholly original creation. But before that, they started by working on things like Ren and Stimpy and The Simpsons and Beavis and Butthead. And people were very, very impressed by their work. And if you look at what they worked on before the Maxx, it's all very, very good overseas stuff. Like beyond what because no one could afford Japan anymore. They were like almost at the high level of Japan set with their productions in like the 90s and 80s that we outsourced to.
By the end of the 90s, Japan couldn't afford Japan anymore. And
That's true.
They were going to Korea too.
They're doing much better now. So they established a strong portfolio by doing a lot of work for other animated series. Greg and Nikki Vanzo started the company, and then Greg's brother Scott joined later. And the Maxx was the first series that they produced all themselves. It was a total in-house production, and they're still around. They recently just did the series Disenchantment, Matt Groening's new series. Of course, they did all of Futurama, things like lesser things like Baby Blues and Drawn Together. Hey, they need a paycheck. We
talked a bit about Greg Vanzo and this in the first episode of Talking Critic we did, because they didn't work on all of the Critic, but when it was time for Beauty and King Dork, which was a CGI animation mix, it actually has a lot of the qualities they would use later that year in the Maxx in that sequence.
Okay, yeah, something I wanted to ask about, because I wasn't able to find any info on the actual production of this cartoon, but it seems to me like it was a very pioneering work in CG being used for 2D animation. I don't know if that's correct, but there are a lot of scenes, like parts of this, it's such a faithful adaptation of the comic where it basically just takes comic panels.
Oh, yeah.
And then animates them in a way that, nowadays we would call that a motion comic. Like it would be based in Flash. But of course, Flash, and even I don't think Macromedia Director, which came before Flash, existed in 1995. So they must have been, I don't know, like either they were doing some weird things with camera techniques, or they were doing some early computer stuff. Because if you look at certain scenes, like at the end of episode 2, where the Maxx and Mr. Gone are tussling, it's just like the drawings from the comic that
like
have
moving
been
in layers.
They're moving, but they're also kind of like bulging and rippling in a way that you can't really do with just hand-drawn animation. But computers would allow you to do that. So I'm really curious to know what processes they use to create this.
Well, it's all digital animation. Some of it is traditional hand-drawn, frame by frame. Other things like you're talking about is moving around existing assets in a very puppet-like way. And that includes assets like Stan Keith's original drawings. They would scan those in. There are times in the Maxx where you're just looking at the painting that was published in the comic book. So yeah, they were really ahead of the game. In fact, things made digitally 10 years later have aged much worse than this. I think this looks really good.
This is based on a masterfully drawn comic book, and they took that material directly, as opposed to like PvP or something.
Well, I think too, Greg Vanzo and his team really deserves credit for the elbow grease they put into when they needed to flex the animation or to connect the still images. They did it so much better, than say motion comics today, even the best ones, which I don't like any of them, but like the motion comic they did of the Watchmen about 10 years ago, that was a high quality one, but I still felt like I'm watching a slideshow, like they're moving arms up and down.
Right.
And it just feels so fake. It feels like in most cases when a character needed to walk between panels or move from a position to a position, they actually animated movements that made sense and fit.
There's some really great animation in here, like some very high frame rate type animation, like the scene of the kid at the gas station who's pumping gas. There's like a turnaround for him, and it does like this 180 degree pan around this character. And it's one of the most impressive, I don't know if it's hand-drawn or computer-based, but however they did it, it's something you don't see in animation very much. And it's like, way up there in terms of quality. And
they do stuff like in the first episode when the Maxx is arrested, the cops in the front seat are just live-action people, the silhouettes of live-action people, and like the Maxx is a still asset that's just sliding down in the seats.
Yeah, and like even at the gas station, that kid's car is like photographs of a big Cadillac that are shot at like with a fisheye lens or something. So they're distorted, but it's clearly like something taken from the real world. And I love that they used that sort of collage mentality that Keith had for his cover work and brought that into this cartoon. It really does feel, Liquid Television in general had some really innovative stuff in there. That's also where you got Aeon Flux. And, like that one definitely left an impression on me, but it was back when MTV actually was kind of cutting edge and experimental, and even though stuff like this took them away from the music part of music television, they hadn't just gone to reality shows yet. Like they were really trying to do something different and giving license to people to be creative.
After Beavis and Butthead made them billions of dollars, this is 2 years after Beavis and Butthead started, they were like, let's get all into animation. So they made things like The Head, The Maxx, Aeon Flux, Daria, and they kept going and going and going. Not so much anymore, but they were pioneers in giving artists the tools and the money to create. And in fact, a lot of the bumpers on MTV were made by people who would go on to become famous through making cartoons, like Joe Murray and I believe Danny Anatucci and people like that. They would all go on to make their own cartoons. But before that, they were making animated bumpers for MTV.
I feel lucky to have seen that kind of cutting edge weird time, and also getting to feel like I was watching something naughty, even though you weren't going to actually see nudity or anything that really broke the rules. It would get you up to the edge of like, oh boy, what am I going to see here? That it felt that, I mean, that was also the MTV advertisement working on me. That's like, you're watching a thing your parents wouldn't want you to watch.
No, I mean, you would not have seen this cartoon on ABC, CBS, Fox.
Never. No.
Like, there's a lot of really difficult material in here, and it's not afraid to kind of toe the line between exploitative and meaningful in a way that network television just would not do.
Yeah, and it's also a good thing that it didn't include music, like it didn't integrate music the way that, say, Beavis and Butthead and Daria did. That's which we've both done What Are Cartoons on before.
Although the Maxx does watch Beavis and Butthead in one episode.
That's great.
I like that.
I love that.
It connects all of the shows.
But it helped it in re-release that you don't have connected in your memories hearing like Ben Folds 5 or whatever over some scene because MTV was like, hey, this is the music, put the music in there.
Yeah, I feel like that would have really broken from the atmosphere of the show. And the Maxx really does have a unique atmosphere in terms of cartoons. Like, I can't think of another cartoon that feels quite like this. It's very dark. It's very sort of brooding and slow. And it has this really distinct art style. I mean, even beyond Keith's very distinctive approach to drawing, his very dynamic approach, like he just went kind of crazy on the world design. Like the story excuse for that is that Julie's father was an architect who made like crazy retro futuristic stuff, and so she lives in a building that he created. But I mean, her apartment is at the top of a building, and it's like this bubble kind of
like
hanging out over the city.
She lives like in a womb, basically.
Yeah, and like, but the whole city is kind of weird and distinct, and he just sort of let his imagination fly, and wasn't really concerned about drawing something that looked like a real city, even though definitely parts of it do. But then for the scenes that he cares about, there's just like some crazy architecture going on, and all of that fits together to create this sort of otherworldly, sort of surreal experience. And I feel like the lack of music, the sort of just ambient sound and sort of big stretches of silence really play into that. And so all the pieces really came together for this, and the production design is really, really smart. And it, I saw this when it was new, when it was airing, and having read up to the comic up to that point, I was really astonished that it was so faithful, because I sat down to watch the Maxx thinking, well, okay, it's going to be an adaptation. It's going to be bad. It's going to take liberties and, really miss the point of the comic, but I want to support it because I like the Maxx. And so sitting down to watch that first episode, I absolutely could not believe how close it was to the comic and how faithful it was and how on point, how well it captured the story and the themes of the comic.
I want to talk more about that because we mentioned earlier, I did not write this down, but that was a good point, that the Maxx is like a manga in terms of the art style and how it can change between page to page and panel to panel. I think the series is like an anime because it adapts a comic as literally as possible. And like many anime series, it has to come up with an ending because the manga is not done yet. But if like in the comic, if Julie looks one way in one panel, another way in another panel, they draw her like that. And I think that's why Rough Draft wanted complete control over that, because if you send this to an overseas studio and saying, okay, there are 80 Julie models in this episode, make sure you draw them all correctly, that is asking for trouble and asking for people to turn down your project. So I think that's why they wanted complete control over this production, because they wanted to represent it as faithfully as possible. But I do feel like this is an anime also because they know when to use animation. They know when, okay, this still image will pass for this scene, but here's where we can spend money on animation that's good. And so if we look at things like, sorry, Henry, the X-Men cartoon or the Spider-Man cartoon, the American idea is like things have to be moving all the time. But because animation is expensive, they don't move very well. The quality of the drawings is not very good. But with the Maxx, it's all very well-drawn things that move when they need to move, just like in a good anime series.
Well, like there's an entire episode of Julie stuck in the bathroom, and it's just her talking over a still image of a door, but it all works. And then if that, in a budget sense, pays for better animation during a big chase scene, then it really pays off. And there's some real like Sakuga in here of just awesome. Like one of my favorite bits of original animation in this, well, like Max's run cycle is just so cool. He's just so lumbering and weird. And also just
all the Outback stuff.
All the Outback stuff. The shots of the Iz hands coming out of the ground to grab him, and just
there's some real dynamism to those. My favorite addition for the entire series is in one of the episodes we're going to talk about, and that's the pan across the city in episode 2, which is like, it's like a 2-minute tracking shot, and then it like flashes to the Outback, so you see these parallels between the real world and the fantasy Outback, and like dudes asleep on their couch with their kids hopping up and down on them very briefly become these like big weird underbite monsters with tiny creatures hopping up and down on them. It's that's not something that you really see in the comic, but they add it here, and it really stands out and really kind of ties everything together in a really valuable way. And it doesn't have narrative there is narrative running over it, but it's not like them saying, hey, here's how everything works. Instead, it's a visual indication.
Yeah.
Here's how this world exists. Here's what the Outback actually is.
And artistically, they were taking advantage of their tool set, because you could do a pan that long in a traditionally animated series, but the piece of art would have to be that long. So it would be like, I don't know, longer than the length of this room, and very, very hard to actually put under a camera and move. So with digital technology, they can make a pan that long. And I think they were not showing off, but saying, what can we do that we could never do before?
Yeah, it was like Scott McCloud's Infinite Panel, except not bad.
And people actually did it.
I bet that got them some jobs. I bet they got rough draft jobs. If nothing else, I doubt they had a lot of budget to work with the Maxx, and I doubt it paid them all that well. But it doesn't really matter, because it would have gotten
a portfolio piece.
Yeah, you just say see what we could do with nothing MTV money.
I don't know if they submitted it, but this should have won an Emmy for something, like a Creative Arts Emmy or something, because going back to it again, digital animation can age poorly. Outside of a very few scenes in this, I am still impressed by what they were able to do in 1995.
This was the same year as Toy Story.
Yes.
How well does Sid hold up in Toy Story? He doesn't.
Don't look at those textures too close in Toy Story on your 4K TV.
The cloud wallpaper is nice, but everything else is kind of bad.
No, I think of all the MTV action shows that this like compared to Aeon Flux or The Head, this has aged much better, I think. Like, I mean, not to, no aspersions on those shows, but yeah.
Before we talk about the series, I have one minor surprise for you guys.
What?
With clips.
Sam Keith here?
He's here. He's in the closet. I hope he didn't chew through the bindings. But no, it's called Maximum Sound. Have we heard of this?
I have.
Maximum Sound. So, Jeremy, what is it? Can you explain
I
what
don't
this
know,
is?
but I've heard of it.
Okay, it exists. It's real. It came out in 1993, the same year as the Maxx. And this is a radio play version of the first 3 issues. I've only listened to it today because I never thought, it's probably all on YouTube, and it is. You could buy it on cassette back in the day through Image Comics, and it's pretty good. And I think the TV series used a lot of the elements in terms of how they were informed in casting and stuff. All the voices are different, but the sound design is the same, has the same sensibilities. The music has the same sensibilities, and the voices are similar to what you would hear in the series, especially the Maxx. But we can hear a few of the characters, and we can hear what this sounds like. It's pretty interesting, and I recommend you check it out on YouTube. And also, each side of the cassette has one really bad song about the characters.
Oh God!
And I will include those in this episode of What a Cartoon. But
Thanks,
here is the Maxx speaking.
I saw a paper. Said it was Friday. Last I remember, it was Sunday. I'm out of control again. Oh God. It started again. The pounding. God, I wish I wasn't drunk. At least that would explain this.
So the Maxx is pretty similar to what he would be. I think he's directed better in the cartoon.
Yeah, he is.
But I will say, listening to this, his mic is a little hot. That engineer fucked up on this recording.
They didn't have, GarageBand back then.
That's true.
But the background sound effects, like the ambient sound, is very similar to the cartoon.
And if you go through this, and again, it's a fun novelty, and it only covers the first 3 issues, which is a complete story within the Maxx. You'll hear a lot of the same sort of background sounds, and the music is very similar. So this definitely informed the direction they wanted to go, and I assume Sam Keith had control over this as well. So here's Julie and Mr. Gunn. Mr. Gunn, his voice is not nearly as good as it is in the cartoon series. You'll hear more of him.
It's hard to top that cartoon series voice.
He's really good, even though he's a despicable monster.
He's disgusting, but his voice is great.
It's great.
Hello, City Health and Human Services.
I did it for you, Julie. The pain, the sex, it was all for you.
Phone creeps. Not again. Listen, filth. Oh, hello, Sergeant Okono. You've got him again? Hold on to him. I'll be right down.
So that's Julie, and this person does an okay job, but boy, I really, really, really like her voice in the cartoon. It's so perfect and world-weary. She plays herself as a kid very well. We'll hear that later in this episode, but she sounds a bit too old in this
Not too old, but her voice has a very kind of sharp quality to it, whereas in the cartoon, it's not raspy, but it's...
Breathy?
Not even breathy. There's vocal fry.
Yeah. I think it's more of a human touch. It's less of like performance in front of a microphone.
Right.
And here's more of Mr. Gon, and you'll hear the vocal effects because if you go into the comic, his speech bubbles have a purple outline around them, and all of the vowels are underlined, and it's not clear what that signifies. In this adaptation, they assume that signifies like a lot of reverb. So we'll hear Mr. Gon more in this clip.
This primitive plane that you think is Australia, and I call Pangaea, is all that is real. The other world is a dream where we are trapped, playing out our deepest fantasies. When Julia Winters was hurt, never mind how, she created a fantasy world for herself, a place where she would have control.
That's Mr. Gunn. Actually, it wasn't reverb. It's more like layering different versions of that voice on top of each other. You can hear the music in that scene, though. It's so close to the music in the Maxx. It's just very mellow keyboards. And if you listen to this throughout, it's like sort of the very jazzy noir-style soundtrack behind the characters, and it all fits very well. This had to inform the TV series in a major way.
Well, I mean, I could see them animating to the first episode to that, and then re-recording it with new voices. But it's just so cute to me. It was a send away in a cassette at the back of a comic book. That thing.
I mean, you had to pay for it, but
it was like the Merry Marvel Marching Society, but with sexual assault.
But Sam Keith wasn't like, "Oh boy, we're gonna have fun with the Maxx today, kids." Okay,
ready to head to the Outback, true believers.
You've heard a lot about the Maxx. When we get back from our break, you'll hear about the episodes in question, number 2 and number 12.
Mr. Gon, Mr.
TV's next oddity.
My mind wanders across all the lonely, misguided people in this dark city.
It's wet, dark and wet.
Full of people who are experts at avoiding reality.
It's the kind of weather that penetrates. Dark and wet.
With good reason. I'm not sure any of us wants to know what goes on out there at 3 a.m.
I did it all for you, Julie. The pain, the sex.
Best not to think about it. Just push it down and go on. Lots of other people could use my help. But somehow, I always come back to old Maxx.
He's big, he's purple, he's heroic. He just may be out of his mind. The Maxx, ruler of the jungle, scourge of the city. Journey to worlds undreamt of with the Maxx,
You've never seen a hero with feet this big. Premieres Monday at 10.
Most of us inhabit at least two worlds. The real world, where we're at the mercy of ads, and the Patreon world, which is ad-free. And you could live in this world if you go to patreon.com/TalkingSimpsons, right, Henry?
Yes, some call it Pangea, but I call it patreon.com/TalkingSimpsons.
I'm sorry about this device we're using, by the way. So if you go there, you can help support the show. By the way, all of our shows are supported by the Patreon. That includes Talking Simpsons and all the other stuff that we do. And if you give it the $5 level, you'll have access to all kinds of bonus podcasts, bonus miniseries like Talking Critic, Talking Futurama, and a lot of other stuff like monthly community podcasts, interviews with so many people. I think we have 15 interviews as of this recording.
Yes.
Season wrap-ups, deleted scene specials, and so much more is happening on the Patreon. We have dozens and dozens of bonus episodes waiting for you there. Anything else, Henry?
Well, if I were to direct people to one really cool thing, it would be our Talking Critic and Talking Futurama podcast, exclusive to the Patreon, where we go through every episode of The Critic and the entire first season of Futurama, both of which are tangentially related to Greg Vanzo, the director of the Maxx. Also, if you're just new to What a Cartoon and you like this MTV talk, you should definitely go back and listen to our Beavis and Butthead and our Daria episodes of What a Cartoon. Those were both a lot of fun.
And by the way, we are also brought to you by Verve, the streaming network Verve. If you go to vrv.co/WAC, that's verve.co/WAC, you can sign up for a free 30-day trial. And a lot of the stuff that we've covered on What a Cartoon is on Verve. And frankly, there are too many cartoons on Verve, and there's too much anime on Verve, and I'm going to write them a stern letter saying, less content, please. I'm having a hard time making up my mind, Verve.
Verve has hundreds of hours of streaming content on there from across multiple networks. You have the anime of Crunchyroll and Funimation. You have original cartoons from places like Cartoon Hangover. You also have classic animated series like Freakazoid, which we did a What a Cartoon for, and a ton of Nickelodeon originals from the 90s on Nick Splat, with tons more being added all the time. And that 30-day free trial will cover all of those. You can check those out on your laptop, on your phone, on your gaming systems like the PS4. Verve is everywhere you want to be, baby.
And if you sign up through Verve, we get a nice little kickback. It helps our show. It helps out Verve. They're great people. So please go to vrv.co/WAC. Thanks for listening to this ad break, and we'll let you get back to more of the Maxx. So we're back, and we start with episode 2, and we're going to probably explain what happens throughout the entirety of the series, because it's about like a bullet point with 10 lists. It's a list with 10 bullet points on it, and there's a lot of cool stuff around that, but plot-wise, not a whole lot of things happen in these 13 episodes.
It's really a 2-hour movie that was released over 13 episodes.
Yeah.
Yeah, I kind of screwed up when I suggested these episodes. I really wanted to look at 3 and 12 because I feel like they're really great bookends, but I forgot like where the story breaks. So
yeah,
my mistake there.
That's okay. These are all very good, and this is the back half of issue 1, episode 2 of the Maxx,
right. and then the first half of issue 2.
And I should say that this aired in a package called MTV's Oddities, which I think the initial idea was for one half to be an episode of the series called The Head and the other half to be The Maxx. But I think The Maxx faced a lot of production delays because the last 3 episodes of The Maxx aired like 6 weeks after the first 10. So I feel like they were having a lot of problems making it. But
so that's why episode 11 is a recap episode in 20 minutes.
That's an extra episode, which I don't think is counted.
Oh,
it's an extra one on the DVD. There's like 1 to 13 on the DVD, and one of the extras is like the Mr. Gone recap episode.
Okay, that was the one I watched in place of 11.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think on the same night it was the Mr. Gone episode and 11, and then 12 and 13 or something
Right.
like that. It was a big night for TV, but yes, there's only 13 and it goes by pretty fast. But not a lot happens. In episode 1, we see the Maxx. He beats up some criminals and is arrested for that, and Julie bails him out. We see Mr. Gone, but not up close. Mr. Gone is the villain of the series, and he is a serial rapist and murderer, and he has an army of little black creatures called the Is.
So rewatch
ISZ. Is how they're
ISZ.
spelled.
So rewatching that first episode, it's when it hit me what a dumb kid I was, because I was the kids you see in this series are just like, the Maxx is cool, and then when the Maxx himself tries to tell him like he's probably just a sad hobo, and they're like, no, I don't like that. That's like, that was me as a kid too. Like, I don't want to think those things about the Maxx. He just looks
stupid.
That's stupid. Yeah. So I was those kids, but that opening scene, his whole speech is a parody of Frank Miller comics. Like, it is a Frank Miller Batman internal monologue about like, the only thing protecting the world is me. His whole lead up to like, sometimes it's sad, sometimes it's me. And then to immediately undercut it with the cops showing up, and you don't get a cool fight scene.
In the series, there's almost like a record scratch when that moment happens. But the first scene is so great in terms of digital animation because it's a slow zoom in on the box, and you enter the box and you turn around and look outside of the box at the rain coming down. It's very, very well done. And it's mocking the very cinematic zoom in the comic done through panels. Like, they really like to figure out what is Keith's intentionality and how do we replicate that through actual animation instead of just still images. But this episode opens with a lot. So a lot of the Maxx is the Maxx just like explaining the flora and fauna of the outback. Just these big digressions like, well, this is called the something and this is what they do.
You know, something worth noting is that even though this is a very faithful adaptation of the comic, they take chunks from one issue and they'll put it in a different sequence. Like that opening dialogue in issue 2 actually appears like in issue 3 or 4 or episode 2 opening dialogue appears in issue 3 or 4 of the comic. But they kind of put it there to give you, I think, to kind of set the stage and say like, hey, there's this outback place. It's weird and kooky.
And those segments are kind of isolated and can be moved around. So I think they do it well here. But here's the first one we have where the Maxx is explaining 3 different kinds of wildlife in the outback.
There are many interesting species of predator and prey sheltered within the broad, grassy spaces and massed granite tarns of the outback. One of these is the outback slug. It can leap nearly a quarter mile straight into the air, but it has never mastered the ability to land. It has no predators. It is just stupid. On the other hand, the great northern crabbit can land and jump, but it has a natural enemy, the Is. The Is can jump and land and has no predators, unless you count me.
So this actor does a really good job at doing this sort of self-serious Frank Miller style dialogue, but also the kind of sad sack schlubby dialogue where the Maxx is just mopey or just like a normal guy who wants toast.
Yeah, it's like if Wolverine from the X-Men comic or the X-Men cartoon were also Danny DeVito.
I love the flexibility of Max's design, that he can be this towering like muscle man doing these cool poses, but then other times like he's drawn almost like a fat little bean of just, and you see it's like a Ren and Stimpy kind of butt they draw on him. Even if you see when like Stimpy is just like slouched over and they draw a butt on him, it's very similar to when they draw the Maxx.
You're right. 90s was a time for cartoon butts, and they're all over the series. But this episode after that flashback to the outback, it starts with that pan we talked about across the city. As we pan across the city, Julie is narrating, about the city, and we get brief flashes as to what these people are in their own outback versions. And the outback is, we learn, Julie's subconscious, where she goes.
I feel like I almost feel like we need to explain what the story in this series actually is in order to make sense of all this.
How would you sum it up?
So
it starts with a long sigh.
Basically, yeah, a long sigh. Basically, the whole thing is kind of a fake out because you think the Maxx is like a superhero, the main character, and that this is his story. But gradually, you come to realize, and then someone explicitly says that it's actually Julia's story, and Maxx is not a superhero. The outback is not his fantasy land; it's Julie's fantasy land, and he is basically her spiritual animal. And his role is to protect her, not to be like the protagonist. And it's really all about Julie working through her trauma, through her, PTSD, and coming to terms with not only the sexual assault that she's suffered, but also just difficult things that have happened to her in her life, and the influence of her parents and kind of the things that she learned as a child. That's really what episode 12 is about. And I feel like, to me, that's sort of the climax of the series. And when everything comes together, the episode 13 is almost like a denouement. It's sort of like the coda almost.
And the rest of the comic is about answering questions like where the Maxx came from. And the Maxx was created when Julie ran over a homeless man she thought was trying to attack her. And then like a hole in the outback opened.
Sort of. I can't remember exactly how it differentiates between the cartoon and the comic, but
in the cartoon, you don't even hear anything about how the Maxx was created. You hear like you found that mask lying in the mud, which is something they had to retcon.
Yeah.
But basically a lamp tipped over and landed on him as he was falling into the outback, and that like sort of melted onto his face. And I believe you see that lamp in the comic too. It is a very Maxx head kind of lamp.
Right. But yeah, she hit a hobo, and I don't think she thought he was going to attack her, but she had been attacked in the past by a hitchhiker that she picked up.
Yes,
and so
that's it.
She was like, I don't want to help this person because last time I tried to help someone, I put myself out there and I was hurt for it. So she just takes him and dumps his body in the alley, and then he becomes the Maxx and becomes bonded to her through the magic of the outback, which comes into play because of Mr. Gone, who knew her when he was like her father's friend as she was a child.
And Mr. Gone is also Sarah's father.
Right.
And he's kind of immortal, and as the comic continues where the series leaves off, he's just a head, and he soon becomes just a pile of jelly with eyes.
Well, and the Maxx also represents like the rabbit she ran over. She tried to help as a kid and couldn't help. Maxx is the same kind of broken animal that she can't stop helping but can't really fix either.
Yeah, she's caught in this weird limbo of wanting to help and being afraid to help. And after she was assaulted, she dropped out of school. She was a college student and took all of her tuition money and set up a company, like her own, not a company, but basically her own business, working as a freelance social worker, trying to help sad sacks, pathetic stories, but she's really bad at it.
I'm glad it's a good job to do, but I wonder, morally, though I always wonder, where'd she get this money? She keeps mailing out these guys, buying them new clothes.
Yeah, it's from her tuition.
I guess that's a lot of tuition money.
I assume the state gives her some money if she's licensed and bonded or whatever.
Though, well, in this episode, Julie has a speech that's like, she's a difficult character. This show is like in a way pre-woke world, but there's some stuff in there like, wow, I am shocked to hear these conversations on a TV show. They talk about like second wave versus first wave feminism, like Paglia versus Steinem, Gloria Steinem. And like also Julia is kind of a victim blamey type person at points. But
yeah, this is the only comic book I've ever seen that has a credit for a feminist consultant in issue 4.
Interesting.
Heidi McDonald.
Wow, that's great.
That's something I appreciate about this.
Who
is
would
that this
fucking
is
do that?
This is two men writing about feminism and women's issues and assault and all these things, and they had the good sense to go to a woman and say, please help us make sure that we're getting this right.
And boy, I didn't mention the letters column in the Maxx. That often was larger than the actual comic content of the Maxx, and a lot of discussions
they'd be like
happen
4 or 5
there.
pages.
Oh God, I remember towards the end it was like 16 pages of letters that really filled out that comic. But yeah,
so it's like kind of going Dave Sim style, except not evil.
Yes, he actually loved women more over time instead of hating them like Dave Sim.
So
but
good.
The feminism in this is something, again, I didn't think about as a kid because I was a kid and I didn't really have to think about these things as a little white kid, a little white boy.
Yeah, this was my introduction to feminism beyond, what's her face, Gloria Steinem, like Paglia and Felucci and so forth. Like I had never heard of these people before this, and this series made me curious and want to know more about them.
Well, Julie is she's complicated, like Henry said, and she is someone who wants to help people, but she's also someone who blames people, like
a lot.
In this thing, she says something uncomfortable, like when guys think when a woman says no, she really says yes, and sometimes they really are saying yes when they say no. And that's hard to hear.
Yeah.
But then she follows that immediately saying, like, I don't think any man who's ever, gotten off a crying woman had any question about what she
meant.
is
both sidesing sexual assaults.
Well,
Yeah.
also that speech, she says a thing I don't agree with either, which she says is like a liberal is a conservative who hasn't been mugged.
Yep.
Like that's
which
that's like dirty, hairy, death wish kind of thinking. But and so I was curious why she says that in episode 2. I forgot though that like in just a few episodes, Maxx himself will tell like, it's kind of fucked up, and I don't think sexual assault should be blamed on the person who it happened to. Like
they watch A Decent Proposal, and Maxx like, that movie was sexist, and she's like, you're so liberal.
I like that.
Yeah,
that Maxx was the woke guy in it. In that, though, also thinking about the time when this came out, this was still back when movies and media and comics would deal with things like sexual assault as either cheap ways to make somebody a villain or titillating moments, like which is just disgusting to look back on now. But it's what kind of everybody did. It was normal, not that it was correct, but it was normalized. That the Maxx doesn't do that, I think, is a real credit to it too. Like when those crimes happen in the story, you don't see, and maybe I believe in the comic it wasn't explicit either. In the animation, you don't see anything. It's all it's more horrifying to imagine what the other people are finding.
And Julie is complicated because a lot of the Maxx is her working through her trauma from being sexually assaulted and the fact that she's living with the guilt of that, because this is a real life thing. People will blame themselves for sexual assault as victims. And she's living with the guilt of what happens in episode 12 and also the guilt of what happened to her that we didn't see 3 years before the series started. She has internalized that and she does blame herself, and that's why she escapes.
So to get back to something Henry was saying about how sexual assault tends to be used, especially back then, in media, in comics especially. When did the refrigerator happen?
Oh,
that was around this time, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was 94, 93. That what Jeremy's referring to is, I believe it was Green Lantern number 58. They had introduced the new Green Lantern, Kyle Rayner, and he had a girlfriend, and there's supposed to be a shocking moment that his girlfriend, who had only been around in about 6 issues, gets murdered off screen and then shoved into a refrigerator. And that comic is not particularly bad, but it became a
flashpoint. It became a symbol.
flashpoint. It became a thing that you'd call a fridging of a character, which is a horrible thing happens to a romantic interest for a man to a woman, that the only reason she exists is for a horrible thing to happen to her to inspire a hero.
Right. And the thing that's really striking about the Maxx is that it is a superhero-ish comic that does engage with sexual assault, but not for that sort of like cheap dramatic effect. It is at the heart of what the story is about, and it is not about like saying, well, that happens or whatever. It's about saying like, how do you recover from something once that happens? What's the fallout from that? How do you go on with your life after suffering something like that? And multiple that happens to multiple people, multiple characters, mostly minor characters throughout the story. But the girl in this episode, Glory, who gets attacked in the laundromat, she doesn't disappear from the story. Like, you kind of follow her at the periphery throughout her recovery.
And the stuff that happens to Julie in this episode too, in the next one, it's not an excuse for the Maxx to have a fight with Mr. Gon or to save her. He doesn't save her.
He gets into the fight before she's abducted.
Yeah.
After the pan, we see some things about some kind of world building-ish things. We see the that we saw earlier. They're living in the city. They're free on their own. They're clambering around buildings. Julie kicks the Maxx out of her house. And then we move to a whole new set of characters, which Sam Keith loves to do.
Loves it.
Who are these new people? And here, it's a bit long, this clip, but here's the entire scene of the laundromat where we see Mr. Gon again. We see Glory and her boyfriend, and she is assaulted, thankfully off screen, but this is sort of the introduction of Mr. Gon once again, and we see much more of him this time.
So, Glory, where'd you get the knife?
From my pop. For protection. He says it's dangerous around here.
Oh. So, what do you want to do while the jacket's dry?
I don't know. I feel really existential today. Like Darby O'Gill and the Little People or something. Huh? Hey, Tommy, cut it out, okay? Just because we're drying our jackets together doesn't mean you get touching privileges. Get us some Cokes, okay? And cool off.
Sure, Glory. Jeez, don't get mad.
Doof. Huh? Who's there?
I can feel the machines begin to leak and belch in my presence. I can hear the beating of her heart. She is like a small, delicious slug. I have only to close my hand to possess her. Hi, honey. I'm home.
So Mr. Gon always has an army of is at his side, and this is a very cool shot that does, again, it's replicating the comic, and that he's in the doorway of the laundromat, but his cloak is sort of growing and taking over the entire inside.
They animate it really well. His impossible magic cloak that just keeps growing.
Again, I don't like that this serial rapist character is very enigmatic and fun to watch. But this actor is so great, and I do like when he gets frustrated. I do like when he is just annoyed, and then he's also very flowery at the same time. But he's like an immortal character, so he doesn't have a lot to worry about.
Yeah, it's hard to call this scene cool because something terrible is about to happen, but at the same time, like, they do put a lot of thought into the framing and the animation and the design of it. But, you know, the introduction of this character, Glory, seems kind of out of left field, but she's the second woman in the series, you know, within 2 episodes to be attacked by Mr. Gon. The first woman, you never hear her name. She's just like a woman who's going to a theater and she's, like, tricked by the taxi driver to be mugged. But Glory becomes more of a character, and you also see a little bit of the story from the perspective of her, I guess, boyfriend, the guy who's interested in her, and he's kind of an idiot. And like
he's a regular teenage boy because you see him coming back. He's
he's thinking on what happened to her, and he's like, that was terrible, but it's kind of cool. Stuff happens to other people, but never to me.
Yeah.
Like he's just very shallow and superficial and doesn't really think like, what does this mean for other people?
Well, the women are all the smartest people in this entire series by far. That reminds me of when we see Glory later. We see her a few more times. Like they say, you know, the doctors are hoping they can save her fingers, and she does recover, and you see her later. But it's like another one of those scenes that Henry was talking about with like the 2 little kids that want the comic to be a superhero comic. It's like, I'd kick his ass if I was this comic guy. And she's like, no, he'd kill you. I thought I was strong, but he attacked me. The knife didn't even help me. He's like,
strong. Yeah. Well, I like, though, that I do like that you get to see Glory again after this, because it shows she's a survivor and her story continues, and that she didn't just exist to be a victim in a scene. Like that, at the very least, the follow-up, and that like you have to deal with the trauma afterwards, not just use it as a plot device.
Yeah, I feel like I'm not qualified to say, is this a successful, you know, take on these subjects, because I'm a man. So like I can't really speak to it, but my perception is that it does at least attempt to engage with these questions in a meaningful way that you don't see in comic books. Even now, really. It has almost the mindset of like, you know, a black and white indie comic, except usually those tend to be kind of misogynistic a lot of the times. I don't know, maybe something like Love and Rockets. I don't know. But it's just very extraordinary content for something that sort of falls loosely within the superhero rubric.
I would really like to hear a modern feminist take on this show from someone more qualified than all of us.
I mean, I did find an article written a few years ago that said, you know, like, there's good stuff here and there's bad stuff here, which I guess is, that maybe that doesn't, like, that's not a good description of it, but it was a pretty thoughtful, I thought, write-up that is probably worth considering. But you know, at least in that one piece of criticism, did not just write this off and say this is garbage. It said, you know, there's a lot of stuff here that makes me uncomfortable, that I don't like, that I think is cheap. You know, like the pinup poses. Even though they're commenting on it, you're still getting pinup poses.
Yeah, that's true.
But at the same time, it does a lot of things that other comic books don't.
Now, there's a reason in the opening they show every time the Julie pose and then into her slumped stomach
she
thing.
Like sucks in her gut, and then you see the real Julie where it gets flops out.
But I think they put that in that is a very good moment to explain her character. But I also think you put that in the opening of the show into teenage boys who are watching MTV. It tells you like, oh, there are sexy girls in this. Maybe I'll keep watching this
With
thing.
a flabby belly. All right.
We go back to Julie's apartment. I believe Glory was the 13th girl attacked or the 12th girl attacked. Max is hearing about this. He wants vengeance. And again, we hear more of Julie's philosophy where it's like, some women just can't take care of themselves. But she is very much has internalized her guilt and is very much she wants to control people by saving them. We see that with the Maxx, and basically Sarah tells her that later in the series and in the comic, like, this is why you're a social worker.
Yeah,
you like controlling people.
And this really resonates in a different way in 2018. I mean, we're recording this a few days after Brett Kavanaugh was confirmed to the Supreme Court, and so much of that, like if you look at statistics and polls, you see like a segment of women have internalized the sort of misogyny that says, Christy Blasey Ford or Blasey Ford was lying. Like the demographic that says that most strongly is Republican women, not men, women. So like this is a thing that exists. This internalization, this victim blaming, this inability to believe other women. So, seeing a comic book engage with this 25 years ago is remarkable.
Yeah, and I think, in fact, the guy who we see later, in this episode, maybe or the next one, he's pumping gas or whatever, and he's like, my dad says that happened to her because she dresses like a tramp, but I think he's full of shit or whatever.
Sometimes things just happen to people.
Yeah.
There's multiple, Max will say the same thing to Julie. He says that too, and that kind of messaging was so important. I feel like it was still accepted as... comedians did jokes still in the 90s and now, but I'm saying
now, yeah,
but back
changed.
then, comedians had jokes then about saying like, all right, Dave Chappelle did a joke that said like, if I walked around in a policeman's uniform and people thought I was the police, I could tell them I'm not, and how dare you mistake me for it? And that's the same with how women dress when they look like a whore. Like that was his joke.
We've learned Dave Chappelle has a lot of bad opinions about things over time.
But that was how people felt then, and too many do now. And they have a line in episode 1/issue 1 too. When Julie shows up in her outfit,
the
cop
right.
says like, hey, I read this book that said if you dress like that, you're kind of inviting these problems. And even then, Julie's like, she just
I love
goes
that.
like, fuck you, and just puts her hair out on his write-up.
Yeah, in issue 3 of the comic, or issue 2 of the comic, which is episode 3 here, so we're not going to look at that directly. When Mr. Gone has Julie captive, he says, "Who doesn't have a problem with women? You were attractive, and then you make us feel guilty for being attracted." So there, like he voices that sense of like entitlement and resentment.
I was going to take a picture of that panel and say Mr. Gone should be on Reddit.
Yeah, he's all those guys.
His head is shaped like a red pill,
and that's after he dresses Julie up like a Playboy bunny, and then complains that women dress to attract you.
He did that
and get
to
mad at you for
her,
being attracted. So yeah, it's showing like this guy is unreliable and an asshole. Don't trust what he says.
Which also comes later, too, when he tells the Maxx real truths about Julie. And he's like, well, but can I even believe this guy? It's Mr. Gone saying this.
So back at Julie's apartment, she gets a phone call, and the Maxx notices where the phone call is coming from.
Hello?
The others cry out for you, Julie Winters. Their screams of agony are the kisses that I place along your neck.
That's very interesting. Tell me more.
Doubtless one of your friends in the police department has tapped this line. No matter. I am having a servant of mine place this call.
Hey, don't I know that guy? What's he doing with 2 phones? And why doesn't anyone else notice he's only a foot and a half high? He's one of those underground things from my dream, only black and faster.
So the Maxx chases Inez across the city, and this is one of those instances where they are very creative with their interpretation. So this chase in the comics is 1 page, and it's like, 60 very, very tiny rectangular panels. It's very cool, and they're able to do the same sort of thing in the series, and they're really saving their animation for this chase scene. It looks really cool.
I also love Maxx and his coat and hat when he puts that on.
He's like a Ninja Turtle.
He's like, it's so funny looking. He's so silly. And I love when he gets surprised and he has cartoon eyes instead of his little eyes.
Yep. And it's worth explaining what the is are. I mean, they're these little round black blobs with feet and mouths and arms.
And sharp teeth.
Yeah, they have very sharp teeth. In the outback, they're white, and they don't have needle-sharp teeth.
And they're like sort of like lemmings almost.
Yeah, they're like stupid, but there's lots of them. They become evil and carnivorous when they come into the real world, and they grow those sharp teeth. But the thing is, they're like, because they're from, the ethereal dream plane, people don't see them as they are. So they see them as whatever Mr. Gone dresses them as. So at one point he dresses a bunch of them up as old grannies.
Yeah.
And so the kid at the gas station is like, weird, why is there all these old grannies in the car?
He seemed pretty busy.
So yeah, it's almost like in the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy books, the somebody else's problem field, where it's not your problem, so you just kind of don't see it, and that seems to be the same effect here.
I love when in the Sarah episode, they put on visors and they are very specifically drawn to the mutants from Frank Miller's Dark Knight Returns.
Really?
Like
okay,
they look exactly like those guys.
My mon Max don't shiv.
So through chasing this he meets Mr. Gone, and that wraps up this episode of the Maxx.
Who the hell are you?
Amazing. You really don't remember any of it. Not the girl, or the is, or the bloodworms, or me.
Then it wasn't all a dream. Unless I'm dreaming now.
Too bad. I normally hate killing amnesiacs.
Oh, God. Now I remember. It was all coming back to me. I could feel the hot sun on my back skin and the grasses under my toes. Those little creatures were but twisted and changed by being moved to this world.
True enough. Too bad you'll be eaten before you'll have the chance to mutter this to anyone.
Damn. Still talking out loud.
I love that running joke.
It's so great.
Because the Maxx is like Garfield. His mouth doesn't move, so he doesn't know when he's talking out loud sometimes.
Yeah, his monologues are actually vocal.
It's such a great parody of all the other comic monologues, the very self-seriousness of Batman, especially talking to him. So that's why I kind of I think I might read that at least first issue of the Batman Maxx stuff, because Batman is played straight, but the Maxx is a joke on what I just love in the first issue. So many people tell him, like, what are you, a superhero? Come on. That's like, they have a real honest to God superhero with super strength, super durability, and claws that are harder than flesh. And everybody's just telling him, like, you're not a superhero. Come on, quit with this crap. I'm like, but that just shows you how crappy the real world is. They're all just tearing him down. They have a real superhero there. And even then they just say, like, superheroes aren't real. Get out of here.
Crazy man.
But he's not a superhero, is he? He doesn't strike me that way. And this is in continuity with Savage Dragon, who is a superhero.
Yeah.
He's got claws.
Savage Dragon is a cop. He works for the police. He's not exactly a superhero.
But the Maxx does have claws.
Yeah,
and can like jump up buildings, and that all came from somewhere.
His purple underwear are a real thing. Like people comment on them. It's not his imagination.
I mean, I'm gonna get some purple undies from Me Undies. Does that make me a superhero?
We don't have an offer code yet, so don't say that.
I love in the drawings of him. Sometimes his purple outfits are drawn as just long underwear or a second skin over him, but other times they look like sweatpants that bunch up at his waistline, which is also
pretty much however Sam Keith wanted to draw him that day.
So now we've jumped to episode 12 from episode 2, and I could basically tell you what happens between those. So Mr. Gone kidnaps Julie, and Julie decapitates him, and Mr. Gone is trying to get closer to Julie to tell her the truth, or to maybe stop her from knowing the truth. I forget what actually happens, because later she finds out the truth on her own.
Gone's kind of all over the place. Gone wants her to find out the truth, but slower, probably in a more painful way.
Yeah.
Because, in episode 10, she's about to find out the truth, and he's like, no, it's too soon. So yeah, he wants her to find out, just not now.
I mean, is that because he wants her to suffer, or is it because if she learns too much, it destabilizes the Outback, and that's the only thing keeping him alive?
Yeah, that's actually true. That is later explained in the comics. So all these things that Gon mentions, like Keith has to answer later, because even in the intro, it's like because the truth could destroy her or whatever. Doesn't he say that?
Could destroy them both.
Them both. Yes. I think it would disrupt the Outback if it's like too much at once, maybe, or something like that.
Gon is an unreliable narrator, mostly just because
of Sam Keith.
Sam Keith didn't know the answers as he was putting those words in his mouth.
So Gon is decapitated. He still lives. His head is still alive, and he's using Iz to get closer to Sarah. And he's Sarah's dad, by the way. And we hear from him later. It's like, I need to finish my stuff with Sarah before I can move on. Maybe to actually die. Who knows? I haven't read up to 20 yet. Reread up to 20 again, so I forget what actually happens.
I like in the flashback, the Sarah episode, when she explains her dad was a barbershop quartet looking guy. That's a great.
My dad is gone.
Yeah.
Oh, you're right.
That Sarah episode was great for me at the time too, because I was starting to be the angsty teenager who was just like smarter than everybody. No, in the show I found like the three places of I was the kids who were reading Maxx and just wanted it to be a superhero thing. Then I grew into Sarah, who was just this angry kid who's like, I'm not even mad. Fuck you. I don't feel anything. And the world sucks and it's never going to get better. And then I also would become like Maxx and Julie, saying to the younger people, like, I've been there. You got to wait, but it sucks, but it does get better. Like, and I've been all those people now. It's really interesting to just feel how right this gets generationally, the feelings, at least that I held.
It's been fun to read this as an actual and watch this as an actual real ass adult. Not someone in my early 20s, not someone who was 12, but
older than Julie.
How old is Julie? Do we know?
25, I think.
Oh, wow. Okay. So what happens is Gon wants to get closer to Sarah, Mr. Gon, that is, and he's just ahead. So he disguises himself as a magic piece of talking clay and gets Sarah to bring him into Julie's apartment with the promise that he will reveal who Sarah's spirit animal is. And later that turns out to be a horse instead of a rabbit. But so Julie's like, what smells in my apartment? She opens up the package. Mr. Gon's head falls out, and it grabs it and runs away. And Julie's like, I need to move. I need to leave the city. And this is basically them sort of recapping what all the crazy stuff that happened.
Are you keeping all these hockey sticks?
Yes.
That was really weird. How that white thingy burst in here and grabbed my dad's head and vanished. Huh.
Yeah, that was weird. But after hanging out with Maxx for so long, I just can't tell anymore.
I hate my dad. Pretending to be dead. When all the time he was that stupid rapist murderer, Mr. Gon.
Or do you hate him because he left you?
And you cut his head off. That's the bravest thing I ever heard of.
No, Sarah. The bravest thing would have been to listen to him.
So the Iz stole Mr. Gon's head in order to have it reattached to his body. I can tell you that doesn't last very long in the comic. It falls off again pretty soon after that. But through this surgery, Mr. Gon starts telling the doctor, who will be killed by Iz after the surgery's over, the story of him and Julie. And I don't know why, for the sake of the viewer who doesn't exist, but he's just like, I'll tell you this story to keep you entertained while you're
He's
doing
a villain.
this surgery.
He's monologuing.
It's true. He loves to monologue,
He does.
but through this, we hear about Julie's story through child Julie. And Jeremy, I like that you picked this because this is also heart-wrenching, and it's about animals in pain, which is my biggest trigger in the universe. It's something that I have a really hard time with, but I think that's why this episode is so affecting to me even today. And like the guilt you feel when you can't help something is something I've even dealt with. So here's Julie talking about where she lives and who she is as a kid.
Hi, you remember me. There's our house. Mommy and Daddy. My room. I love the old elm outside my window. I sit under it sometimes and pretend I'm a jungle queen and have adventures. Then I come back inside and cuddle in bed, and I'm safe. My daddy draws buildings. He draws the insides of office buildings downtown. This is the lobby of the Dexter Basco something building. It will be beautiful if it ever gets built. If I was going to work in a building, this is where I'd work. Daddy wanted to paint covers for paperbacks, but he didn't, because publishers are dumb, Mommy says. Sometimes, when he thinks I'm asleep, Daddy stabs his drawings with a pencil over and over and says bad things.
Interesting sound-wise that the scratching you hear of his pencil will be the scratching of something else later in this episode.
Yeah.
So I forgot about that just listening to it again. But it's funny, again, in this quote-unquote edgy MTV superhero series, it's Sam Keith going, let's tell another story about a woman that has nothing to do with superheroes. It's about childhood trauma.
Well, and this episode brings together a lot of imagery from the previous episodes, especially related to the Outback. You have at some point Max stumbles into Julie's like deepest, most innermost Outback, where child Julia exists, and child Julia says, even Julia doesn't come here. You can't come here. This is a sacred place. And when you see those sequences later, Max is just a skull there. He's dead. He can't exist in that space. And also, there's a lot that kind of comes back here with the episode where Julie is abducted by Mr. Gone, episode 3, where she has these like flashes to the Jungle Queen, who's red-eyed with fury and holding a wooden doll and saying, if this doll doesn't shut up, I'm going to comb its head right off. And that's when she beheads Mr. Gone. But that echoes here with,
Yeah,
that's pretty intense. That beheading of Mr. Gunn.
I mean, as if the symbolism wasn't obvious by now. This episode's like, here's what everything means.
Yeah.
Like, she pretends she's a jungle queen. Here's the doll, getting its head brushed off. That happens earlier in the series.
Also, her dad is Sam Keith. Like,
You
I
think
don't
so?
know if you've seen pictures of Sam
Yeah.
Keith that he drew himself. He's at a drafting table. It's about an artist who's drawing all the time, who isn't drawing what he wants to draw, perhaps, and just it's about being a freelance artist. I wonder too if the stuff with the relationship between Julie's mom and dad, where she actually plays bad cop and he's the good, he's just this old softy, and she meanwhile plays a ditz on the phone with his freelance bosses just to get him more work. I wonder if that's a relationship he and his partner have as well.
I will say he was raised by a single mother, and his partner is much older than him, like 20 years older than him. I think they're still together. So I feel like that is what really puts him in touch with writing for women and maybe thinking about mothers and things like that in those terms.
Yeah, he definitely seems to understand women better than most image artists, I would say.
Most comic book creators
Most
in
comic
general.
creators who are not women, which are most in the mainstream, not thanks to exclusionary practices and hiring.
Well, Mr. Gone introduces the story like, this is a story about me, but it's actually about Julie. But he enters the story briefly as Uncle Artie. He's Artemis P. Gone. He's a friend of the family. And he's talking about visiting the Outback and the creatures he sees there and things like that.
The real Australia.
The real Australia, yes. But he's still making up... He's still making up bullshit, though, about like, the air whales and things like that. You got to see them. And at this point in the series, in the present, Julie has been to her own Outback with the Maxx. She sort of understands what it is and why it exists. I skipped ahead a little bit. It doesn't really matter in terms of the storytelling here. But before Uncle Artie arrives, we find a new member of the family, a small bunny.
Oh, God.
Mommy always does what has to be done. Something in her shuts off, and she pretends it didn't happen. I guess that's what being a mommy is all about. One day, I find a bunny in the road, squashed like a piece of clay, like the clay I make my pretend houses out of. It's her, screaming. I didn't know bunnies could scream, but maybe I can make it better. Like I fix my houses after I smash them with a hammer. I take it home so it can be my friend. It's not screaming anymore, but now all it does is look at me and wait. My stomach hurts.
So in the comic and in the cartoon, this is not done in an exploitative way or like cool, like a gory rabbit skeleton or whatever. It's done very artfully in a way that does mask the horror of what is happening and just like an animal that's very injured.
So this is where it clicked for me, the clay thing. I was like, oh, right. His head, Mr. Gone pretends his severed head is a talking block of clay, and that's what that's why Sarah brings it to her house. Like it's the clay all it all fits.
Yeah, well, and Julie's father is an architect who pounds his board in frustration when he thinks no one's looking, and she creates houses out of clay and smashes them with a hammer. I guess when she's frustrated. And on top of that, the houses that she creates are exactly the same as the jungle hut she lives in the Outback.
On top of that, there's a frame in the comic and a scene in the series in which in the flashback, Uncle Artie's like, "So you think the bunny's dead yet?" And it's his head that looks like the little clay house. I think it's like next to a clay house. Like symbolism, it's right there, people. It's right there.
There's a lot going on in this episode.
Yes.
And the talk about the mom, you see from both the mom and dad what Julie got from them. And with the mom, she's talking about how the mom is able to bury things deep, and just like she doesn't want to think about it anymore, she doesn't think about it. And that's a lesson, not a good lesson, but I guess a lesson for survival that Julie did learn.
Yeah, and that clip plays immediately after a scene in which her and her dad find a bug, and they don't know what to do about it. And her dad's like, maybe it'll just go away. And her mom just squishes it because she has to do these hard things, or maybe she feels that she has to do these hard things. Did we miss the fact that little Julie says that the Uncle Artie reminds her of her doll?
Oh, no.
That's in here, too. Yeah.
Wow.
So, again, all of these things. And then she combs the head off of her doll when she's frustrated when her parents are lying to her and saying that the bunny will get better, and that's echoed in episode 3 when she cuts off Mr. Gon's head in issue 2
while
of the
she's
comic.
having the vision of the Jungle Queen brushing the doll's head off.
I didn't want to miss that. Yeah,
too. It's God. It's just the hurt animal thing. It's the same. I mean, it's effective on just about anybody, unless you're a sociopath. It's a real sociopath test if you're not. But
this is the new Voight Kemp.
Whenever I see a picture of a cute pig on Twitter, I write bacon underneath it. No one's more clever than me.
You're quite an edgy guy, Bob.
Lord of edges, really.
But when I was a kid, this type of stuff got me too. In Calvin and Hobbes had a similar storyline with this too.
Oh my God! Yes,
with the raccoon that he saved but he can't save, and his parent also takes care of it as well.
And there's another Sunday comic where half of it is a drawing of a dead bird that hit Bill Watterson's window. And it's Calvin and Hobbes like remarking upon its beauty in a Sunday comic.
Yeah.
What a bring down, but still very beautiful. The parents discover the bunny, and they don't really know how to react to it.
Pumpkin, can we see what you've got there? Sweetie, I think the bunny needs to live out in the garage to get better. Oh, God. Look at its leg.
That was very strong of you, John.
Bunny, they leave. All I know is I couldn't help the bunny.
In between all of these scenes of Julie's childhood, we see it cuts back to her apartment in the present, and it's clear she won't let anything go. She's sort of a hoarder, but it's all like mental baggage as well. She's like, I won't throw all of this trash away because
broken
you never
hockey
know.
Sticks, gotta keep them.
Yeah.
Dead plants, I don't know.
All the kits she has there too. I like it. Reminds me of, we just did the Talking Simpsons for Homer's Phobia, which was also about this kind of kitschy collector-y stuff too. Like she has so many of like these like bad albums or the kind of junk people accumulate, like say in this apartment right now.
That's a lie, Henry. It's all valuable stuff, like that cell of The Thing and Barney and Fred dancing around.
Exactly. It was worth at least $150 when I got it.
The Thing is the original Maxx. I think we all know that.
Oh yeah. Well, and when you talk about the Max's mood and how he's similar to the Thing, he's also in the Maxx in this one. The big hero of the comic is just pouting the whole time, like. Oh wait, that's the next episode. But he's
pouting throughout this. And He's not realizing like Julie is going away. He's just being asked to carry a lot of things down to the curb. He doesn't really know why, and he's grumbling about it. But after this, in the past, that's the scene where Julie brushes the doll's head off, and her dad is trying to comfort her, but her dad is the opposite of her mom in that he's trying to sugarcoat everything instead of just doing something directly to end it in a non-graceful way. So he's saying, Julie's thinking like, oh, they're telling me I have to wait for God to come and take the bunny. And then she's still like really sad about her dad is like, maybe it'll get better. Maybe it'll just get better. And then she's like, well, Daddy can't lie as good as Mommy. Even as a kid, she knows.
It's an interesting change up of expectations too. That you would think in a flashback like this, the father is the harsh one and the mother is the too nice one.
I don't know. I feel like it kind of speaks to the nature of just the roles that women are thrust into, and not necessarily in families, but just in society of having to kind of put on one face and bury their pragmatism down inside and get stuff done while putting on the sort of pretty innocent airhead appearance.
Yeah, actually, that moment where the father takes the bunny back and she comforts him like, that was a very strong thing you did there. That was really just, she knew the father has to do this. It means more. It's just the way things are done. But it was all her actions. Like, she was like, we have to do this.
Yeah.
Sam. You have to do this. I'll fix this. Only when she cannot get the father to do the things that she feels needs to be done will she finally actually just do it herself.
Yeah, the scene before that, she's like, we have to do something about this. So this whole episode wraps up, at least the flashback part of it ends with the mom basically euthanizing the rabbit with a shovel. And again, it's very artfully done. So if you're watching this, if you plan on watching this, you're not going to be grossed out or repulsed or anything like that. I think they do a really good job with selling this visually.
I knew Mommy would come, because Mommy always fixes everything. Daddy leaves the important stuff to her, and she takes care of it. Or makes it disappear, so we don't have to think about it.
And that's really one of the first traumas that Julie is living with and dealing with still.
Well, on that thing still, I mean, the rabbit represents all her other traumas too. When she's thinking about that, it represents the later trauma she will focus in the same deal. Like she buries all of those things, like the rabbit stinking under her bed also is the Maxx. Like the Maxx
is a rabbit.
Yeah,
I think we didn't even say that yet.
Right.
The Maxx is a rabbit. In fact,
he's
issue
a
2,
spiritual animal.
Yeah, in issue 2, the cover, his claws are up next to his head like bunny ears.
Well, you see images of a rabbit, like a very photorealistically drawn rabbit, all throughout the series. And then in the Crap On in a Hat episode, where he has the dream, surreal vision within a vision, his fears are all named Dave, and that was who he was. He was a plumber named Dave before he was killed and became the Maxx.
That's how he knows about faucets and
right.
stuff.
And beneath his mask, his face is a rabbit.
Yeah,
and he's terrified of that prospect once he realizes it.
And Mr. Gone, because he's too clever by half, calls him Brer Lapin.
Right.
Yeah,
Which,
and
like,
even
we get it, Gone.
Even the Jungle Queen calls him that too sometimes.
Yeah.
So yeah, and so here is the last scene of this episode, and it takes place in the present.
So, you ready?
Just about. Things are a lot clearer around here now. When I was trapped in the outback, I kept meeting little versions of myself. I think that means there's still a lot of stuff to learn about myself before I can start screwing with other people.
I suppose you're keeping this old rusty shovel, too.
No, Sarah. Throw it out.
So she even kept the shovel that killed the rabbits, and that pain she is still living with. So I guess she was able to let go of just that element of it at least. But yeah, so the next episode is the finale. It's where Julie leaves and the Maxx gets to live in his own outback. But the comic keeps going, and all the things that aren't answered that Mr. Gone sort of promises there will be answers to in the animated series, they are answered throughout the rest of the issues up to 20. And I feel like I've been reading them and I'm like, okay, the pressure is on you to actually finish this story, and now you're obligated to not jump around and just do whatever ideas you want. And I find it somewhat satisfying. It's not very satisfying, but I like that he had to finish it. He had to answer questions.
You know, I think it's unfortunate they never got a season 2. This is a satisfying enough ending of the. I'm glad they leave Maxx free, and that original, which was not in the comics, is freedom thing at the end, right? Him going into the greenhouse. That
scene is the only original scene in that episode where Julie does leave, and that's like sort of the final page of the comic. And in the comic, she comes back about 7 or 8 months later, like fully pregnant, after having like a wild time stealing cars and sleeping with guys and stealing other things. And that's when it's a comic about Sarah more, and she's discovering like, who was Mr. Gone? Why is he trying to get in touch with me? And Mr. Gone is trying to find like a protege because he's just a lump of like flesh with eyeballs.
I feel like there wasn't a second season just because of the production issues with this show, and also they didn't have enough stuff from Sam Keith to make more of it. You know?
Keith needed 2 more years to finish up to episode 20, I think, or at least like 1 more year.
By that time, the iron was no longer hot. They couldn't strike. It had cooled off quite a lot by that point, which is unfortunate. But yeah, since the comic was so close to what they animated that you get the ending by reading those 20 issues.
Yeah, for sure. And I want to thank Jeremy for bringing this to our attention. I think we eventually would have stumbled upon it, but again, going back to this, I realized how much I love this as a preteen and early teen. And I think a lot of it still holds up today. And it's so
I'm really pleased by how well it holds up, honestly.
Yeah. Animation-wise, storytelling-wise, and just like conceptually, I feel like this is so ahead of its time. I think it still holds up today. I'd like to hear a modern feminist take on it again. And I feel like in terms of animation especially, this is such a great production. And we didn't mention this earlier today. We didn't mention this earlier on the podcast, but this isn't streaming anywhere. But there is a great cheap DVD set you can get through Amazon. It's like $20. Is that right, Henry?
Yeah, $20, and it's made to order. It's printed on discs, but they have commentary from Sam Keith and Greg Vanzo on every episode.
I've owned that DVD since they first released it, and
You've had it for almost 10 years, Jeremy.
And I didn't realize that there was commentary on it.
Also, it's funny that when they put out the show on VHS, they actually didn't have the shark episode, I guess because at the time they were worried about its legality with the Eric Larson
I'm pretty
character
sure
they remaking it.
I think it was because of just they wanted to use a cheaper VHS tape, and
so
it was
10 minutes
something they could
less.
cut out. Yeah,
I see.
Yeah.
I mean, it is though I love that episode because they have the most straightforward superhero fight in it, and yet at the same time you have two generations of feminists talking about what Sarah's mom is in the kind of Tipper Gore mode of parental advisory stickers, and then meanwhile Julie is more of a laissez-faire, they're gonna find violent stuff anyway. Who cares? Don't censor stuff.
Right, and that's being cross-cut against what I was talking about earlier, Mr. Gaughan's narration, talking about he's supposedly inside of the deepest, darkest part of Julia that really loves the violence, and he's so excited about watching this brutality, and everything's going to come to a head, and finally the hero's going to lash back and really give the villain what for, and it'll be totally deserved, and it'll be this satisfying, cathartic experience of violence. But actually, what happens is that the room that they're in explodes and the building collapses, and it's a complete subversion of all the expectations. You're like, how is he going to resolve this after deconstructing the whole concept of the hero's revenge? He's not. It's just everyone gets blown up.
They go into a place called Just Chords, and it's just hanging.
It's phone cords, and for some reason they're using solvents to clean all the phone cords that day.
It's very weird. Yeah,
that's them making fun of the convenience of superhero comics too. In a more arched way.
It's also a chance for Sam Keith to draw cords.
Yep,
he loves drawing cords. Yes, I like that. Mr. Gaughan in that comic is making fun of you for what you bought an Image comic for. This is what you want, right?
This one, I think that's the only issue that really breaks the fourth wall, where Mr. Gaughan is speaking to you, the reader.
It really does, yeah. And it does work for what it is, and I think it translates well to the TV series without the Savage Dragon in it, and without the Savage... I think the character is the same, right? Mako or whatever, or Hammerhead?
Hammerhead there is a shark guy that is a Eric Larson creation, so they replace him with Hammerhead.
Okay, yeah, and the cop is changed into some sort of Harvey Bullock type character.
Yeah, he's just a cop, but
I like him.
He says the line Savage Dragon said, pretty much.
Okay.
Later, the Maxx will appear. He appears in Savage Dragon number 28, so not too long after this. The Maxx got around. I really like this show even more than when I was a kid. I am now old enough to feel ways about things.
You're old enough to be the Maxx.
And I'm too old to be the Maxx now. I don't like that. But yeah, I now see that I was the kids in this. Now I am the adults in this, and it's aged pretty well. I'd say also, thanks to the show, I would bet that the Maxx is more remembered than Youngblood or Wildcats or Shadowhawk in the popular consciousness, just because this show just so sticks with you. I'd say only Spawn of the original first couple of years of Image is more well known than the Maxx. Oh, Webworks, yes. No, a little more than Webworks, and The Pit, more than them.
But Spawn is still around, and they're rebooting the movie series, right?
Oh, no.
It's going to be directed by Todd McFarlane.
That's a good idea. I like it.
Todd McFarlane's putting up the money, so he's insisting to direct it.
He's selling all of his famous baseballs to make this movie.
I mean, it can't be more of a disaster than those Ayn Rand movies.
Oh, boy. Somebody funded that garbage. Jeremy, before we go, final thoughts on the Maxx.
Since I'm older than you guys, I first saw this series in college. And so I had a different first experience with it, like a different perspective on it when I first saw it. But, I've still grown up a lot since then and learned a lot since then and become a lot more aware of, the realities of social and gender politics and things like that. So rereading it and rewatching it for this episode has been pretty enlightening. And I feel like this series actually had a lot of impact on me and caused me to question a lot of things that growing up in conservative West Texas I kind of took for granted, and made me stop and say, interesting. No one ever talks about these things, but this comic book is correct. So yeah, so I feel like, this comic and this cartoon were pretty important for me, and it's been pleasant and really enjoyable to go back and revisit them and to find that, hey, yeah, this is still good. And I agree with you, Bob. I would like to hear, a feminist impression or interpretation of this. But I feel like Sam Keith avoided a lot of the pitfalls that other men creating comics in the 90s fell into, and deliberately so. Like this really feels like a work that's set out to stand as sort of the antithesis of what comics were at the time. And it's amazing that this came out under the Image imprint, because Image was so much about like all the dark age of comics type crap. So yeah, I'm glad this existed, and I'm glad that MTV said, hey, we need to turn this really esoteric comic book into a cartoon that's extremely direct and faithful to the comic book. It's this whole thing is just a miracle, and I really like it.
Excellent. So thanks for listening, folks. Before we tell you who we are and how to support us, Jeremy, you're a special guest. We work on stuff together. You've got your own stuff too.
Sure.
How do we help you and support you and find your stuff?
I work on this podcast called Retronauts.
Oh,
with
I hate
Bob.
that other guy.
Don't tell anyone. So you can find us at retronauts.com. The podcast is on, iTunes and the Podcast One network and so forth. And like Bob and Henry, we have a Patreon, patreon.com/retronauts, where you can support the show, get early access, high quality bitrate, no ads, that kind of thing. We talk about old video games, and it's pretty cool. I also have a YouTube series related to Retronauts, where I have been traveling through the catalogs of the Nintendo Entertainment System and Game Boy and other systems, and looking at the evolution of those platforms game by game, and looking at how video game history evolved. So it's a very anal retentive sort of journey of 8-bit video game history, but I like it, and I enjoy doing it.
Thank you, Jeremy, for coming along and suggesting this
for having
topic.
me.
It's been great. As for us, this entire network is supported by the Talking Simpsons Patreon. Please go to patreon.com/TalkingSimpsons to find out how to support the show. If you give it the $5 level, you will get this podcast a week ahead of time and ad-free every week. And the same goes for Talking Simpsons. And we have so much bonus stuff happening at the $5 level. We have bonus miniseries and so many other bonus podcasts, dozens and dozens of podcasts for you to listen to. And if you like our voices, and I assume you do because you made it this far, there's a lot more of us on the Patreon, and just $5 will get you all that stuff immediately. You'll get a nice little code to drop into your MP3 player of choice, your podcast player of choice, your podcast app of choice, and you can download our bonus stuff alongside all of your normal podcasts. You can fit us easily into your podcasting lifestyle, and that is patreon.com/Talking Simpsons. Henry, how about you?
Well, at patreon.com/Talking Simpsons, I would tell folks if they signed up, they get access to tons of other exclusives, just hearing stuff ahead of time, like Talking Critic, which we talked about earlier, where we go through every episode of The Critic in chronological order, including the terrible webisodes, plus Talking Futurama, which Jeremy also was on an episode of that, where you go through the entire first season of Futurama and talk a little bit about Rough Draft and Greg Vanzo there as well. Plus, you can listen to our interviews with tons of Simpsons pros. I would, if you're a big animation fan, I would definitely say listen to our one with Mark Kirkland, where he talks about getting his start in the late 70s in Hanna-Barbera and how that led to The Simpsons. And if you like all this comic book talk here, you should listen to our more recent interview with Bill Morrison, the current editor-in-chief of Mad Magazine, who got his start on Simpsons comic books back in the early 90s and has a ton of art thoughts on how to draw The Simpsons properly. It was a really cool interview. So check all those out, patreon.com/Talking Simpsons. And you can follow me on Twitter as HENEREYG.
And you can follow me on Twitter as Bob Servo. And thanks for listening again, folks. Up next, our next episode will be Robotech, the episode Farewell, Big Brother. We'll see you then.
Every single day.
drown. I have to fight back or be destroyed.
You've always had what it takes to make it happen, and we know the right tools can make it easier. At Strayer University, we're always thinking about new ways to set you up for success. That's why we give you a brand new laptop when you enroll in a bachelor's program, so you can start off on the right foot and keep striving. Visit strayer.edu to learn more. Eligibility rules, restrictions, and exclusions apply. Connect with us for details. Strayer University is certified to operate in Virginia by Chev.